And we're live. Welcome to the show, everybody. My name is Jason, and just to give you an idea of what we are doing today, I work in a software development company that does third party software development for other companies. And because of my role, I get to meet many interesting people, top performers, thinkers, and really just innovative people here in the high tech sector. And I am so pleased to have on the show today Jonathan, who really has such an interesting life. He is a lawyer, he is a coach, he's done so many things. And today we are hopefully going to tease out some of the interesting tools, habits, and success points that have led up to who Jonathan is. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for being with me here today.
Thank you, Jason. It's wonderful to be here.
And so let's just get started. How did you come to this point where you're actually about to publish a book in about 2 months' time? What led up to that?
Yeah, look, I suppose it's the actual immediate trigger was when I did my coaching degree, and sort of part of the coaching degree was how to write a book to use for your coaching practice. And it's a book that I'd been wanting to write for about 15 years. I did a lot of traveling when I was younger, and I trained as a lawyer. I worked as a criminal defense lawyer. Had a lot of different roles. Taught in university and had a security license. Taught meditation classes, a whole bunch of different stuff. And I'd been wanting to write this book for a while, but I couldn't really find my voice. And then about 15 years probably I tried, and every few years I'd try and I'd write 10 pages, and it was very self-conscious and very painful to read what I'd written, and I'd throw it away and come back a few years later. But when I did this coaching course, and I found I had the purpose introduced to me in the coaching course, which was, hey, write a book for your practice, for your coaching practice, to like show who you are and what you can do. And that was what I really needed to sort of funnel me into that vessel. So once I had that, I just poured my voice and the story and what I wanted to focus on into that vessel, and that's what I've been doing for about 3.5 years or so. And I'm just finishing up that book now, and it's going to be hopefully available within a month or two. And yeah, so that's where the book's at.
That must be such an incredible journey.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, and it just goes to show how important it is for people to find their voices with what they want to say, because obviously we all have our incredible journeys that we've taken, and it's not always easy to find the voice that puts that out in the way that is going to be the most meaningful and the most sort of purposeful for a person. I definitely found that different ways I tried to share the things that I had to share, it wasn't me. It didn't give over the message. It didn't give over who I was. It wasn't focused on what I believed was the core of what I wanted to say. So yeah, it's almost like the form and substance are both very important to have for sort of an organic unity. So when we're looking to present ourselves, we obviously have to have something to say, and most people have something to say, but the way that we say it, sort of the form that we use to project that substance, is really vital and really important. If we don't have that, then our expertise and our substance can be fantastic, but it's just not going to connect with people. So yeah, and again, I had the substance way before I had the form, and it took me over 10 years to find the right form. So it depends. Either side, it's difficult to get that unity. It's difficult to get the expertise together, and it's difficult to get the right voice to project those expertise in a way that other people want to listen.
I love that once you found your purpose, then you had something to say. You had this book to write after you'd gone on all of, like you mentioned before, that you'd gone on all of these travels and these journeys and all these things in life, and you were able to put all of that into a message that now you can give to people and empower people. I wanted to ask you a question over here. I've always wondered, what is the difference between what you do as a coach and what, say, a therapist does?
Right. So I suppose the classic answer to that that I've heard is that therapy is focused on the past, and coaches are focused on moving forward from now. And that there's a few. I'd like to address a few points about that.
Mm-hmm.
firstly, it casts therapy in a little bit of a negative sort of light. It's just about the past, and coaching is just about the future and now, and hey, let's do it. That's not accurate. Coaching and therapy are both very valuable, and there is an overlap. For example, CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy is something that therapists practice and coaches practice. So there's an overlap there where a therapist and a coach will basically be doing similar things using cognitive behavioral therapy. But if you're just looking at therapy that's not doing that, or classic or traditional therapy and coaching, I would probably demonstrate maybe with a story
Hmm.
what I feel is a major difference between the two. When I was taking guiding meditation classes a long time ago, I was based in a remote part of Australia. I was a defense lawyer for Aboriginal legal aid in the Australian outback. And I was in a small town. It was about 10,000 people. And I don't know if there had ever been a meditation class run there before, but I decided to do it. And a bunch of, really wide ranging bunch of people got together for these classes. And there was this middle-aged couple that came, and they were like big into a UFO society. And they brought along a friend of theirs who was a 60-year-old woman, maybe around that age. And she was a farmer, or a farmer's wife, and she was, a woman of the land. She was quite, rough, and she'd obviously lived a hard life. And she came along and she just said, yeah, I'm totally fine. I just want to try this meditation stuff. Like, I'm just curious, She was very sort of aloof, and I noticed her eyes were very cloudy. And she kept saying she's fine. And I didn't see that. Looking at her eyes, I didn't see that so much. So we had this meditation class, and I told the class about different breathing techniques and visualization and using their intention and their awareness and all this type of stuff. Um, and then the class got underway, and then halfway through the class, let's call this woman Val. So halfway through the class, Val started crying. And it's not uncommon in these types of meditation situations that emotions can repressed or buried emotions can get moved around when people are going to deeper places in a meditative sort of state. So this type of thing happens. I wasn't the slightest bit surprised. It's not unusual. And I'd speak to people in the class beforehand about this type of thing, that don't be surprised if people come out with some emotion, or if you come out with an emotion yourself. It can happen. It's natural. So I went over to Val and I just asked how she was doing, and she said, I don't know why I'm crying. Um, but I could see her process was healthy, and I could see that it was, that this was just a natural flow within the meditation. So I just encouraged her to continue, and I kept an eye on her, and she was fine. She kept crying softly for the rest of the class, and then at the end of the class, she hung back a little bit, and she came up to me afterwards, and she said, I asked how she was doing, and she said, I I still don't know why I was crying. I don't understand why I was crying. I don't know what I was crying about. Um, I was like, okay. So we talked about it a little bit, and she came back to every class. She came to every class. She cried in every single class, and she never understood why. She never knew why she was crying, but she kept coming back, and she started to clear. She felt lighter. She felt better as the weeks went on, but she didn't understand really what was happening. Why? What? She didn't necessarily understand, but she felt the change. And her eyes also, um, when she said she was confused and she didn't know what was going on, or she didn't understand why she was crying, she lost that aloofness. She wasn't so I'm fine anymore. She didn't have that vibe anymore, but her eyes were much clearer. They were really clear, and she kept coming back, and it was great. And that demonstrates a little bit what coaching's about, and it could be that some aspects of therapy are not as much like that. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on what therapy is and what it is, and I'm not giving an expert opinion here. I'm just positing that in coaching, we're working on we're looking out for what works. We're looking out for what works to generate that movement. People get stuck, etc., etc. There are all those cliches about, oh, can't move forward, I'm stuck, etc. But at the end of the day, we're looking for the movement. We're looking to keep moving forward in positive ways and developing things. And we don't always need to understand what's holding us back. Sometimes it's very valuable too. And we definitely, we don't shun understanding. But understanding is not always essential. We can do very positive things. We might not be able to get closure about some things. We might not be able to understand some things, but that doesn't mean we can't move forward. And I welcome any therapist to correct me if I'm wrong about this. I feel like understanding within therapy plays a more central role, that there's more of a linear progression of, we move forward through understanding. Like, let's understand, let's work on understanding, and that will enable our movement. And coaching does that as well, but it's not as linear, and where we don't need the understanding, so we don't focus on it as much. So, there are people like Val in situations like Val, who feel the benefit and experience the benefit of doing something that really works in their life, and they may never understand what exactly has gone on with inside them, or what, they might not understand, and it doesn't take away from the value they're getting. So that's a way that I would sort of illuminate something about coaching and contrast that potentially with therapy.
That's beautiful. Where really therapy is about unpacking the past, coaching is moving forward and going through the future and almost stirring emotions up and dealing with them in the now in order to move forward, would you say?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, where we need to go back into the past in order to clarify something that's going on right now. You know, I mean, great. We'll do that. That's fine. Um, but our primary focus is not to go into the past in order to gain understanding of everything that's going on right now. Our primary focus is, well, so what's going on? Tell me about what's happening. Where are we at? What do we need to do? And then we use that as a springboard to then, formulate a goal and the vision, and then build in incremental, measurable steps towards that.
That's beautiful. Something that I can imagine that you learned over your years of coaching is the importance of listening. And what struck me when we first spoke, and the few times that we've spoken, is your ability to explain things through stories. Can you talk to us and our listeners a little bit about that technique, that showing instead of telling?
Yeah, sure. Look, stories.
Yeah.
I love
Love
stories. Everyone loves stories. And why is that? Why is a good story so mesmerizing, draws people in, um, and it's so effective? And I think, if we're going to dig into the core of that a little bit, we're going to find that people love, and this again ties in with coaching, people love
that.
learning things for themselves. People love coming to realizations themselves. It's so powerful and effective when somebody works something out for themselves rather than being told by someone else, this is what you need to do. This is, the consultant who comes in as the expert and says, I know what's wrong with you. I know what you got to do A, B, and C. And meanwhile, that person's sitting there saying, well, that might work for you, but it doesn't work for me. I'm not you. I'm different.
Mm.
And that's not my solution. But when that person can come to their own solution that's unique for them, and they have someone to help guide them to do that, so that's very, very effective, because people are much more likely to execute their own solutions because they feel that authenticity about it, that they worked it out themselves. They're proud of themselves. It's very valuable. It's very meaningful. So when we're talking about stories, one of the sort of, people love that escapism aspect of it, but on a more pragmatic level, stories are wonderful because a person listens and they understand something from the story that's unique for them. They take the story in and they gain their own very tailored, customized impact of some message the story was telling. And 10 people can listen to the same story and draw 10 unique conclusions that are valuable for them from that story. And each unique conclusion will be very valuable for each one of those individuals. And the other 9 conclusions that everyone else drew from that is not valuable. for the one person that drew their unique one. So stories are fantastic because it's a way that draws people in and enables them to then understand and gain insight for themselves where they need, and then move forward with that.
We've talked about, yeah, show not tell, and the importance of stories. And I love that conclusions like that you can take a conclusion, because people, you're right, that when people get told something, there's a block to that. But when you able to show someone through a story, and they can draw their own conclusions and come to their own meaning, as you said, I love that. That's so powerful. Then people can sort of change and grow from that, and bring that to where they need to be. What were you going to say now about listening? And
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk a bit about listening. So when you're listening, I suppose how the book came about and the way I approached, the way I approached as a former criminal defense lawyer, as an advocate in court, cross-examining witnesses and things like that. Listening was quintessential. It was just so vital to being able to do the job well, because you needed to be listening in every moment for every sign that might tell you something that you needed to know. And it wasn't just listening in the classic sense of you're listening to sounds the way we listen through our ears. When we talk about listening, we're really talking about all our senses picking up a whole bunch of input and bringing it into us. So, when I reference listening, I'm talking about things we're seeing, things we're hearing, things we might smell, things we're touching, and we're bringing all that raw data into us, into our conscious mind, and then we're using our experience and our knowledge and our insights to process that, and we're processing that into a more refined sort of product, which are our insights that are going to move us forward the next step. So if we hear a sound in an environment that sounds out of place, so that's going to resonate with us, and we're going to have to process that, and we're going to have to decide what to do about that. Maybe we'll do nothing, maybe we'll do something. So talking about listening, I would divide listening into 3 distinct categories, and those 3 categories really delineate where the source of what's communicating with us is, where it's coming from, because that makes a difference. So the classic listening that we'll start with is listening to someone else. You're in a conversation with someone, you're listening to them. So they've taken. I'll just clarify one point before we continue. People talk a lot about reality, like what's your reality, and I find it to be quite a loaded term. It's often often weaponized a little bit, used against someone. I say, get with reality, or you don't understand reality, and it's just, what does that mean anyway? Like, what's someone really saying when they talk about reality like that? So I don't like to use reality. I'm going to talk about what people commonly refer to as reality in a different way. I'm going to refer to it as our objective truth and our subjective truth. They're both truths. The objective truth within us is what we see in the world, for example, a tree, a house, someone else's emotion. Someone else's emotion is to us an objective truth. It exists in the world. It's a fact. We take it inside us if we choose to. We take someone else's emotion inside us, and that then becomes our subjective truth. We're then experiencing that ourselves. It's passed through whatever triggers of experience and knowledge we've got, and it becomes maybe something different within us. But someone else expressing emotion to us, for example, that's an objective truth to us.
we have let me just see if I get this over here. So this is beautiful. So when we talking about listening, and we're talking about experiences, and you have an objective truth, which is like a tree, or you mentioned like a house, or like an emotion. And say, for example, I see someone, I don't know, smashing a plate, right? Which is an example you've used before. That emotion, it goes through my triggers, and if I absorb that, or when I absorb that, I that comes into me through my senses, that is subjective, correct?
Right. Like let's say 2 people see somebody very angry, throwing a plate against the wall and smashing a plate.
Okay.
That's an objective truth in the world that exists in the same way for all 10 people who are watching that. They all see the same thing. It's an objective truth. Nobody can argue against what just happened. But those people, depending on their past experience, you know, maybe some have experienced violence in the past or abuse or who knows, but depending on a person's experience, if one of them's a police officer, if one of them is a therapist, they're, they're going to, they're going to have their own experience and knowledge, which are going to act as triggers within them that will turn that experience, that objective truth, into unique experiences of subjective truth within each person. So my subjective truth, seeing that smash plate, might be very different from your subjective truth. They're both truths. They're truths that exist inside each one of us, but they're different. So that whole scene is comprised of, you know, the reality of that scene is comprised of two halves for every person. It's the objective truth of what happened in the world, which is the same objective truth for all those people. And it's each person's unique subjective truth that's affected by all their triggers, the knowledge, their experience, their own emotions, etc. And that's different for everyone. And it's a truth. It's the subjective truth within them, which also, it's not a matter of judging it. It can't be disputed. It's a truth that exists within a person.
Right.
Is it damaging? Maybe. Is it unhealthy? Maybe. Might it lead to someone else getting hurt down the track? Maybe. But that doesn't change or impact its status as the subjective truth within them. So that is the reality in that situation. It's comprised of those two halves of objective truth and subjective truth within the person. So when we're talking about listening, you know, we're really talking about a process of taking objective truth in from outside us into our conscious mind through our own triggers, where it becomes our subjective truth. That's listening. And there are basically three different forms that can take. When we're listening to someone else, so they have their, you know, they take an objective truth that goes through their mind, gets processed through their subjective truth into something different, which then they project to us. And we take their subjective truth, that becomes our objective truth. So if someone is angry, their anger is their subjective truth, but it's our objective truth. It's a fact of the world that comes from inside them subjectively, but we take it to us as an objective truth that exists in the world. And then it gets processed by our own subjective truth into something personal to us. So that's the listening process when we're talking about listening to someone else with a conscious mind who has their own subjective truth that's changing objective truth that they experience, and it passes through their subjective truth, and it turns into something different that we then take inside us. So there's a much more complicated process going on when you're listening to other people. A much more simple process of listening is when you're listening to an environment. So a car, you know, if a person hears something in their environment, a loud noise from a car, for example, there's no subjective truth with that car. That car doesn't have a conscious mind that's changing things that you're trying to understand about an objective fact in the world. It's just a car and it's doing something. So if a person's just walking a street and they hear a sound that's really out of place from a car, maybe there's a red light and they hear a car engine accelerating when it should be slowing down towards that red light, they hear that. So that now they've heard something that stuck out to them, but that's just an objective truth in the world. So when they're listening to that and they hear that, they're literally just taking a simple objective truth in through their triggers into their mind, and now they're going to process that. So the whole extra level of processing that's required when you're dealing with another person who has their own internal subjective reality, that doesn't exist when you're dealing with a car or a tree or something like that. It's just that thing that you're trying to understand.
Because it's not going to respond back to you.
Yeah, there's no extra layer of truth that you're trying to get behind when you're dealing with an object as opposed to dealing with another person. Because dealing with that person, and again, this is going to depend on what the goal is. When you're dealing with another person, let's say another person is very angry and they're communicating with you and they're really expressing a lot of anger to you. So what's the goal? What are you trying to achieve by listening to them? If you really need, if the goal is to validate them, meaning you'd like to help them, they're in a challenging emotional state, and you'd like them to help them calm down. You'd like to help them regulate their emotion. So the facts, the objective truth behind that emotion, what caused the emotion, what fact happened, what led to it, it's less important because you're dealing with the subjective truth of their emotion.
What's
So
inside of them? Yeah.
your goal is to affect that subjective truth inside them. You want the subjective truth of their emotion to change. You want to help them with that. What caused that emotion behind that, the objective truth? Somebody said something to them and it caused them to be very angry. What was it that was said? What made it? It might not matter because you're dealing with the anger, which is the
Mm.
subjective truth of that person. But if your goal in that situation, let's say there's an emergency and you need an address, you need to send an emergency response, a police or ambulance or whatever. You need to find out an address to send a vehicle. That's an objective truth. So the emotion's less important. You don't care about the emotion in that moment. That's not your goal. You don't need to validate that person and help them to feel better. At that point in time, that's not the goal. The goal is to get behind that anger, to get behind that emotion, to the objective truth behind that, which is they know an address, you need that address. So you're not focusing on helping them feel better. You're focusing on how do I get that address? You might need to work with their emotion in order to get behind it. But your goal's not to resolve their emotional state in that moment. Your goal is, I need that address and I need it now. How am I going to get that?
So it starts with the goal in mind. And that's really beautiful because it goes into one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast. Um, it's very hard to gain knowledge in the world. Um, it can be challenging to know who to listen to. And one of the reasons I started this podcast was in a way is order to learn from people, to experience, to discover things, and to take these things and then bring it into my own life. And that's why I have this platform, so that hopefully other people can take these lessons and these stories that we spoke about and and bring that and take that into their own life and use it in the way that they want. And that's almost the goal of listening. And maybe one of the points of your book, you mentioned there were 32 stories, but maybe one of the tenets of your book is to help people use that within their lives. And the idea of conversations, which I think that especially today in our political spectrum, it's so hard to have discussions with either side. And people are so diverse and things are so um, wild today. The fact that I think conversation between people is so, so, so important because we have so much to learn from one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's complicated. It's complicated because a lot of people that I feel like there's a lot of difficulty in separating out objective truths and subjective truths. And that's what our reality is. Our reality are objective truths in the world and subjective truths within us. And um, I think people tend to sometimes just blend them together and they don't understand that there's facts in the world that, you know, nobody's disputing because we're all looking at the same tree and we're all identifying the same tree. It's the same tree for all of us.
Mm.
Uh, but it means different things to us. And whatever it means to us, that's also a truth. It's just a different type of truth. It's a truth that might be different between people, but it's still a truth within us. And I
Mm.
think that there's a tendency from a lot of people to maybe not validate the status of what we experience within us or our insights as a level of truth. It can be a truth that we don't agree with, that we dispute. Um, it can be a truth that can change depending on if we think more about something. So we might change our position. And that just means our subjective truth has gone from X to Y. It's now a different truth. But at every point in time, what we're experiencing inside us, whether it be an emotion, whether it be knowledge, thought, it has a status of a truth within us. And that's, I feel, a really important point to sort of use as a launching pad for people to validate themselves and to validate other people and to recognize that we're dealing with a complex reality of things which are objectively true outside us and subjectively true within us. And based on whatever our goal is in a particular situation, that will determine how we're going to approach those two distinct spheres or realms of truth that we have to navigate and negotiate.
So a question that comes to mind is, how do we walk through life and in the workplace and uh, distinguish these two things so that we don't end up mixing them together?
Look, maybe I'll answer that by speaking about the sort of purpose of my book, what the real focal point of my book is. The 32 stories that I mentioned, the way that it's set up is that there is a critical analysis of all the behavior, because they're all my stories, and I'm the protagonist in all of them. I experienced all of them firsthand. Each one of them contains a critical situation where either my life was at risk, someone else's life was at risk, there was a core value that was at stake, there was maybe a lot of money that was at stake. Whatever it was, there was a critical moment where I had to make a very important decision under pressure, which determined the outcome, so to speak, of one of these critical value items, whether it be a life or money or whatever it was. And there's a critical analysis of all the action, the behaviors, the emotions, the perceptions, the thoughts that were going on all through these stories. That, again, just to reiterate, happen in a bunch of different roles in a bunch of different places around the world. The book is called The Superpower. And the superpower is the decision, or it's really the fusion of our decision and our execution of that decision in a critical moment, often under pressure, when there's very high value at stake. And everything we do beforehand in our lives that builds up to those moments, and obviously those moments are often unpredictable. We don't know when they're going to happen anytime. And everything we're doing in our life that builds up to when those moments actually happen funnels into our capability to make the best decision possible in that situation. And I define the best decision possible in that situation as the decision that meets the need of that moment. So obviously that the best decision depends on what a person is perceiving as the critical need of that moment. And then their ability to be able to execute that under one of four core capabilities that we've got, which is to listen, to think, to speak, or to act. So how we perceive the need in that critical moment, and then how capable we are to say or do or think or listen the way we need to make that decision real in the world and effective. That's the superpower. And I call it not a local superpower that's different between people. I call it the superpower because I see it as being a universal superpower that every single conscious human being possesses. That if we're all able to do this as much as we can, when it really counts in the critical conversations that we have, in the critical moments where we need to take action, when we really need to listen, when we really need to be quiet, when we really need to speak, when we really need to act, when we're able to do that, no matter where we are in the world, our age, our gender, our education, our childhood, our past experiences, our current job, whatever it is, doesn't matter. We all have these situations. And when we're able to do that, so that is when we become our best self, when we perform in the critical moments where great value is at stake. That's when we are our best. That's the best we can be. And that's what everyone wants at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to say and do and be exactly who they need to be in the moments when it really counts. So that's the superpower.
That's beautiful.
So yeah, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, because like that's the name of this podcast, is Top Performers Podcast. It's how we can strive to become top performers in our workplace and also in our lives. And what you're saying is decision making, having that backlog of subjective truths within us, things that we've learned in the world, is so critical so that we can go forward and crush it when we really need to, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would identify the fundamental capability that we've got that sort of is at the core of all the other capabilities that we have as listening. I think listening is the most important thing that we need to do well, because listening it helps us to develop within ourselves. You know, we learn experientially. We take a whole bunch of stuff in. We try and understand. Things resonate with us, and we have to explore them. You know, when someone says something, and it hits us in a certain way, either very positively, very negatively. We have to stop for a moment. We have to catch that trigger. We're listening, and we have to catch that trigger,
Love that.
and ask ourselves, well, there's a truth in that. The fact that resonated with me is a truth, and I need to illuminate that truth. There's a reason that meant something with me. So listening really grows us on the inside, grows our mind. It grows our ability to understand what's happening, what's happening around the world when we experience things. And it helps us to be able to engage dynamic situations in the way we need to. How do we know what the critical need of a moment is? Well, because we've been listening. We've been listening. We understand because we've heard things, we've understood things, we've seen things. And because we've had the clarity in that moment to be able to take that on board and process that raw material into something meaningful, that, you know, we have an idea of what our goal needs to be. We know what we need to do in order to achieve that goal. And we have the ability to be able to do that. All those steps are branches that come out of how well in our life we've been listening to other people, listening to our environment, observing cause and effect in the world. But also the third aspect of listening, just which I didn't mention before, which I'll allude to now, listening to ourselves. And that's a really critical third aspect of listening. And that means that when an instinct is triggered, or we have a habit that we engage automatically without thinking, that's listening. Those are objective truths. An instinct, if we're walking down the street and we get an intuition or an instinct hits us that there's sudden danger, that's an objective truth. It came from inside us. It came from an unconscious place within us, or a subconscious place within us, and it rose up from that place into our conscious minds. It entered our conscious minds as the awareness of a danger. But we didn't consciously think there's a danger. That awareness came to us from a deeper place within us. That's an objective truth. That's a fact. It's the instinct that we caught in that moment is an objective truth that entered into our conscious mind now and is now a subjective truth within us. So what are we going to do about that? We caught the instinct, which came into our conscious mind that there's danger. And now in our subjective mind, we now think, oh, so there's danger. And now we start to work consciously. What's the danger? What am I seeing? What am I hearing? What could it be? What am I going to do about that? That's all now subjective truth within us that we're processing. And we're going to come out with what we believe is going to be the need, meeting the need of the moment, the best decision for that situation that we're going to be able to execute. That's the goal. That's what we're aiming for.
It's all about meeting the need through listening, through taking in those triggers within us. We catch those triggers, and then we can come to that decision that we need to. I think that is so beautiful. You've given us, Jonathan, today so much beautiful, beautiful knowledge. Uh, all of the stories that you've told me and the showing and not telling, and just really that idea of deeply learning from other people and using that within ourselves, understanding that within ourselves so that we can put that out into the world. That is really beautiful, Jonathan. Um, thank you so, so much. I wanted to ask, where can people find you? They want to
Right. So right now, look, the website's being built right now. When it's up and running, it'll probably be just under my name, jonathanland.com. LinkedIn is probably the best place right now to find me. Yeah. Until further things develop with the marketing approaches for the book and stuff like that. So LinkedIn is the best right now.
Beautiful. And I will post the link to that on this episode. And of course, when your book comes out, we'll post that as well. And if you have any comments, maybe any tips that you've gained from this, any insights, anything that you want to add about the importance of listening and how that's helped and subjective and objective truth in your life, please do add that below. Uh, Thank you so much, Jonathan, for being here, and for our listeners. Thank you. And
Thank you.
will continue to become top performers.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.